Is that a legit Super Street Fighter 2 turbo machine behind you?
I got all kinds of good stuff here. I got that buddy, and then I got this big 29-inch multi-sync monitor, and got some PVMs around. So yeah, I got all kinds of goodies.
You got a little treasure trove there.
Yeah, it's a this room that's not nearly big enough for all the stuff I do, unfortunately. So yeah, I got it full of CRTs. I keep thinking of selling them because like shaders are so much better than they used to be. It's gotten to the point where like, is there really a need in me toting around 1,000 pounds worth of TVs? But
Yeah, you make a good point, man. I've got two CRTs, just one little 14-inch CRT TV, and then I've got one PC monitor.
oh yeah,
And
awesome.
dude, like since I've been using the shaders, I don't remember the last time I turned these things on.
I know, right? Yeah. It's my cab here. It's you can see that I've got all my synthesizers in front of it. That's how often I use it. Is that it's just this piece of furniture that takes up half my room. That's haven't even turned it on in a couple of years. But,
Yeah, is that like your man cave you're in or something, or your office?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's slash office. Yeah, that's if I do any work from home, this is where I do it. And but this is where all of my hobby stuff goes. So my house is itty bitty, so gotta put it somewhere. Unfortunately, like I have to keep like anything that I do anything with. So I've got all of my like carpentry stuff, and then I've got my synthesizers. I got my computer. It's and it really is. It's really poorly organized, but I know where everything is. But it's really hard to get to anything. I have to do like the Tetris thing anytime I want to get to something. It's gotta move this stuff over here so I can get to this thing, and then I have to put the other stuff back because then I can't move around in here. But yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
it's an active, functional space. It's you can't expect it
Yep.
to be super neat and tidy.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's a couple of things I gotta keep clean. I gotta keep my solder station where I can get over and solder stuff, and I gotta keep my synthesizers where I can play with them without too much trouble. But that's about it. Everything else is secondary.
With the arcade machine behind you,
Hmm.
like, do you ever need to open it up and maintain it? Because I imagine that's about 30 years old now, or maybe about 29, 30 years old, that machine, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a thing that I didn't really get with arcade stuff when I first got into it. And interestingly related to like emulation and stuff, I always felt like arcade emulation was really obtuse, and that's borne out by a lot of the support stuff that I do with RetroArch. There's I get a lot of questions about like why, how do I do this with arcade stuff? Why is arcade stuff so weird? Why can't I, why are the ROMs constantly changing? And what didn't occur to me until I got into arcade hardware is just that arcade hardware is like a handmade sports car, like a classic car that's just like constantly breaking down. They constantly need work. Every time you turn them on, something else is broken, and you have to go in and fix it. So a perfectly functioning machine is is a very transitory thing. It works for a little while, and then something breaks and you have to fix it. Any functional arcade has a full-time tech that's constantly swapping
Really?
cabs out, swapping boards out, swapping monitors out, sending them off for repair and recaps. Like it's just like a constant maintenance thing. And arcade emulation is completely designed around that process. So all those, when you get an arcade ROM, that's the zip file, and if you open it up, it's just a bunch of funky numbers .bin. Those numbers all correspond to the chips on a board, the EPROMs, which are disposable and reflashable. And so if your board breaks for whatever reason, you can pop off the EPROM and go, take your MAME ROM and take that, and find the label on it, like, okay, this is A6104B, plop it into your EPROM reader, burn the thing, drop it back in your board, and you're off to the races. And that made all of the weird arcade stuff suddenly make sense to me, is that it's like, oh, the actual emulating and playing of the game is secondary to this arcade maintenance process that is the real purpose for why all these games are dumped the way they are.
Okay, that's interesting because I've looked inside main zip files a number of times over the years, and I had no idea each one of those files corresponded to an actual EEPROM chip on the actual arcade board. I just assumed it was like some coding language or some, I don't know, just like multiple files that constructed the actual ROM file.
Right. Yeah. Until I got into the hardware, I had no idea why any of that stuff was done. And it always just seemed like, why don't they just make a, .arcade file or whatever? And I just load it up and that's the end of it. Once I started messing with the hardware, I was like, oh, mind blown. This whole thing makes sense. There's really smart people making really smart decisions behind the scenes. And it doesn't always seem so smart to people that are that far removed from what they're originally trying to do. And of course, a lot of the decisions were made back in 1998 or whatever. So like all of the names having to work with FAT16 and that stuff is still, there's a lot of weird legacy stuff. Which again, with a lot of the arcade emulation stuff, there's people still running weird old systems from 1998, and so it has to be compatible with FAT16.
Oh, is that why MAME ROMs and like Final Burn Neo ROMs are like 8 characters long? Is that a holdover from the old days?
Sure is. Yep. Yeah. They're carrying this huge burden of legacy, but they do it. They manage.
Dude, we've only been talking for like 10 seconds and I've been emulating games for over 20 years and you've just blown my mind and taught me something new, which I had no idea.
Yeah, no, it was a huge revelation for me too. Yeah, I was very surprised to learn all that stuff. And it was, like I say, a big, enlightening moment for me that it's like, wow, like there's this whole world of stuff that I just wasn't privy to. And like I said, they need constant work, and it's really hard to keep an arcade cab up and running. And as hard as that is, it is cake compared to the pinball scene.
Are you involved in that too?
No, thank God, no. I've thought about it, but well, for one, I don't have the space. I thought about getting into virtual pinball, which is a really cool thing that's going on now, because you can make a pinball cab that folds up essentially like a Murphy bed, and you just push it against the wall, and it ends up only taking up a couple of square feet of space while it's leaned up against the wall. Then you can swing it down, and you can use solenoids to simulate like all the physicality of the machine. But that physicality is what makes pinball such a horrifying hobby, that as hard as it is to keep a cab up and running, because there's like this mixture of electronics plus physical components that all need adjustment. Pinball just has like dozens, hundreds, thousands of little bits and bobs everywhere that are all electromagnetic components. So solenoids and magnets and stuff that you just have to constantly service everything. And then pinball stuff is wildly expensive, and the boards themselves, a lot of the pinball tables, they made 600 of some model or whatever. So and then half of them got smashed 2 years after they were there, because they're like, all right, well, it's, this is an old board, we don't need to throw it in the dump. So there's these tiny numbers of them. It's hard to get replacement parts for anything. They're all constantly breaking and having to be serviced, and a single pinball machine is tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
It's like all the problems of arcade hardware hobby multiplied.
So like my local video game store or used video game store, they have 2 pinball machines by the entrance that anyone can play, and
oh wow,
at any given time only one of them is ever operational.
Yeah,
and,
right.
They look rusty as hell. Like these are like really old machines, and I had no idea it was because they just break down all the time.
Yeah, they're just this huge maintenance hazard. You really have to love them to want one around. Which pinball's a little bit before my time. I mean, when I went to arcades as a kid, they had pinball machines there, but I was more of a like Woody stand-up guy. I didn't play much pinball because I was a little kid, and
Yeah.
but people a little bit older than me that predate the good arcade era of the early 90s, there's those people, they all love pinball. There's a arcade near here, Game Galaxy. It's owned by Jason Wilson, a former pro Street Fighter player, and he's a pinball guy. He played Street Fighter professionally, but but he still considers himself a pinball guy, and he's got, these banks of pinball machines, but they're, again, half of them are always broken, and he's having to just dump all this money into keeping them going. But,
Which city or state is that in then?
Game Galaxy is in Smyrna, Tennessee, right outside of Nashville.
Oh, okay. I've never been to that part of the country.
Man, it's an awesome arcade. If you make it out here anytime, be sure to check it out. It doesn't get repped all that much online, but as far as like regionally, it's the best arcade around for the whole southeast region of the U.S. I think, as far as I know, it's based on like what I know of Game Galaxy and what I've read about Galloping Ghost. I haven't been to Galloping Ghost, but I think it's at least comparable to Galloping Ghost. Like it's a big deal. But yeah, I'm surprised that more people don't come out for it. I guess it's just because it's not advertised that much online.
Well, now I've got an excuse to head down to that part of the country.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I was in Salem, Massachusetts. Last Halloween, and there's this one restaurant there. It's like a diner restaurant type place called Bit Bar.
Oh, that's cool.
They got a huge collection of arcade machines. So not those kind of arcade one-up types, but like the actual CRT based things. But they've also got this entire bank of pinball machines, like the Mario, Ninja Turtles, like loads of them, and they all look like they're in mint condition. I don't know if you've ever been up there. But
no, I haven't. No. Man, that sounds awesome.
Get some chicken, get some beer, and then literally you're on pinball machines at the same time. So I'll send you a link to it later on.
Yeah, I'd like to check it out. Yeah, and that business model has been pretty popular for people like the barcade idea. But man, I can't imagine being a proprietor of that, where you mix in food and booze with these like the maintenance of keeping the arcade machines. I can't imagine how much time they spend just like wiping chicken grease off of stuff and cleaning beers out of control panels. No, it's already a nightmare. I can't imagine making it worse. But that's, I guess, that they do it. It pays the bills. I tell you an interesting thing related to this is Jason, who owns Game Galaxy, was telling me about this when he helped me get this cab, which was very nice of him. And he mentioned that he was like, in Tennessee at least, there's if you want to have a cab that you pay quarters to play, which is how we all remember it, quarters or tokens, it has to be inspected, I think, annually by the state amusement board that governs like video poker and stuff, and you have to pay for this little sticker that goes on it, and that inspection and that sticker costs it's not an insignificant amount. It's a fair amount of money to get somebody out here to inspect your machine, make sure you're not cheating people, and slap that sticker on it. And because of that, nobody can make any money off of a quarter-driven machine anymore, because quarters aren't worth what they used to be. And then the amusement board charges more and more all the time for these inspections. So it's made it so that nobody can run a quarter-driven arcade anymore. Game Galaxy charges a cover. It's $5 to play for 2 hours or $10 to play all day or whatever. And a lot of places that have these restrictions on there, because they do treat arcade games like they treat Mortal Kombat as if it were a gambling video poker thing. They have those same governing rules that the economics just don't make any sense anymore. And so, they've had to switch over to the weird cover charge model, which is very strange to me growing up with arcades, but it's just the reality of the scene.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, that would explain a lot, because over here, a lot of those old arcades the very few that have survived, they've all changed to the entry price model, where you pay like £10 or £15 or something, and then stay for a few hours or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, which has some advantages too. I used to be okay running into an arcade, dumping $5 over 20 minutes into a bunch of quarter munchers and then taking off. But, nowadays I wouldn't do it. So, I've gotten to be a tightwad in my old age. So, like being able to pay a certain amount of money and not feel like I'm, just dumping my money in a hole makes me feel better too.
Yeah. To be honest, even when I was a kid, whenever I'd spend money on an arcade, I'd feel so guilty after doing it, because our family was broke. And I used to think, why did I just spend that money? I just pissed it away.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I remember my mom would give me, some amount of money to go play. And then she'd be like, and here's this quarter. You can use the payphone, which another thing dates how old I am is payphones were a thing at a time. Yeah, and so she'd give me this quarter, and she'd be like, "All right, this is for the payphone," and I'd always, like get down to that last quarter, and I'd spend it anyway, and then I'd have to call her on the call her collect on the phone and try and cram my message into the where it says like say your name. I'd have to be like, "It's Hunter, come pick me up at the arcade," and then when it would do the collect call, she would hear that as the name and come pick me up. So I was always supposed to save the quarter for it, but I always spent it anyway. I was a bad kid.
Yeah, I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe you're a bad kid.
yeah, bad in that way. Yeah.
So when you were a kid, which game systems were big, or what was your kind of introduction?
Regular Nintendo, like Nintendo Entertainment System. That was the thing I started out with as a kid. That was the first one my family had. My brother got one when I was, I guess, about 6, and I played it a lot, but we never had very many games. We had 7 games on it, which I talk to people now, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I didn't have any games. I had like 50 games," and I had 7 games, and they were all garbage.
Do you remember what you had?
Oh yeah. Let's see. I had the good ones. I had Super Mario Brothers 2, and I had Karnov. If that tells you anything, Karnov was like the highlight of my collection. And I had the Three Stooges. I had the Karate Kid. Oh God, what else did I have?
Some classic LJN action there, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'd borrowed Skate or Die from somebody for a long time, and I can't even remember which other ones I had. But yeah, it was a terrible lineup, but I got really good at those. To this day, I can like roll right through the Karate Kid, which is a really hard game, but because I played the crap out of it as a kid and have it all on muscle memory still. But I played the crap out of it, but it was still Super Nintendo is what I consider like that was the golden age of gaming for me.
I agree.
Somebody down the road who owned a Sega Genesis, and I was a big Super Nintendo fanboy at the time. The console wars was a big thing, and I had no appreciation for the stuff with the Sega Genesis, which the Genesis technology is aged so much better than the Super Nintendo technology.
You think so?
Yeah, like the super primitive sample-based audio from Super Nintendo era, like just sounds bleep bloopy crap. But like Sega Genesis, man, you hook that up to something where you can really hear it, and like it's got like super low bass, that 80s synth bass that they put in so many games, and like I think that stuff has just aged a lot better. And something I didn't realize again at the time that it was kind of a mind-blowing thing when I found this out about Sega's consoles, that they designed every console iteration that Sega came out with for years and years was always designed first and foremost to be based on their arcade hardware, with the whole idea being that whatever their big games at the arcade were, they would port them over to these home systems, and it would be easy to port them because the arcade hardware was so similar to the console hardware, which is a great idea. But when I look back at these consoles, I don't think, like, I'm not like, oh yeah, I used to play Afterburner on Sega Genesis. No, I didn't give a damn about that. Like it was like Sonic the Hedgehog. Like that's the stuff I cared about, or the weird X-Men games. Like I didn't give a damn about these arcade ports, even though I dumped a bunch of money at the arcade. I didn't care about them.
Yeah, Afterburner's a funny one because I remember seeing a clip of it in Terminator 2 when I was a kid, when John Connor's at the arcade at the Galleria.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
He was in the cabinet that moved around.
Yeah, the gyro cab thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember thinking that was when I was a kid watching Terminator 2 on pirate video cassette. I remember that bit. I was so hooked to. And but in reality, I'll be totally honest, this might be blasphemy to some people. I just don't think Afterburner's that fun to play.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. Yeah, it's just yeah. And again, that's and those arcade games are, they're designed to separate kids from their quarters. So like you bring those into a console situation, and it's just not the same, like they give you 3 credits or whatever, and then you play for 15 seconds, and then you're like, all right, well, back to the title screen. It just doesn't translate all that well. So I feel like that was kind of a weird driving force behind a lot of their design stuff, to be so laser focused on porting these arcade games that don't really work in that context anyway.
No, I must admit, I think there are a lot of great arcade games, like especially from Sega.
Oh yeah, totally.
I always preferred Space Harrier to Afterburner.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I also love some of the other games. Like I've got a soft spot for is it Alien Syndrome or was it Alien
Oh yeah.
Storm? Belt scrolling beat 'em up. I think it's Alien Syndrome or Alien Storm. I always forget which one it is.
Well, and then there's Alien Soldier, which was on Genesis. I don't think I'd ever had an arcade thing, but that one's awesome
no,
too.
get one by Treasure. It's very expensive now to buy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've only ever played that game a little bit because it's so friggin' hard. But I dug up a tool assisted speed run of it and watched it, and I was like, wait a minute, this speed run is like 50 minutes long. The game has like a million levels. Like it goes on forever, and it's and it's brutally hard. So I can't imagine like legitimately playing through it.
Dude, I played that game and yeah, it's like absolutely sucked at it. But I even tried playing it with an invisibility code
Oh, nice.
just to see if I could get through it. And even
Yeah.
with the invisibility code, the game is a slog. Like it's really long and it just never seems to end. And the enemies that take up like all the bosses take up like the whole screen and
yeah, right.
They just take a lot of they're like bullet sponges. And,
yeah. That was the other thing the speed run did that really was a game changer. I think was the they used the dash, which apparently like just murks the bosses. So they just go and dash into the boss, and then like it takes like a half second to kill him. But even so, like I said, even with all that, it's like 50 minutes long. It's nuts.
Yeah.
If you were going to actually play it, it would take at least like probably 3-4 hours to play through the game. That's a marathon.
So I started off with the NES when I was a kid, but then after that, I had a Sega Mega Drive or Genesis as my 16-bit system. I didn't get a Super Nintendo until a lot later on. And I think the Sonic the Hedgehog soundtrack, like the music from those games, especially the first two, the third and fourth, or the third and Knuckles to a lesser extent, I think the music of the first two games is phenomenal. Like even just the sound and the instruments and just however it's engineered and composed, it sounds amazing. But I always found with the Mega Drive, there's a whole bunch of games that use this sound that just sounds like farts. And and just it really kind of like MS-DOS-y kind of.
Yeah, the bad sounds on Genesis are real bad. There's all the Genesis shmups, which are great, but the CPU of it actually allowed for really good shmups, whereas the Super Nintendo had like 2 shmups that suck. And it's just because the CPU was so slow.
There's a few good on the Super Nintendo, like I'd say
Aleste or and there's
UN Squadron was at Area 88 in some countries or whatever it's called.
And that's they're okay, but yeah, the Genesis Mega Drive had just like a buttload of really good ones, like the Thunder Force games and all that stuff. But for whatever reason, all of them put this really horribly grating plink sound whenever a bullet hits a thing. It's like blink, 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 and it's just this terrible grating sound, and it's just you hear it constantly because it's anytime a bullet hits anything, and so it's just awful. And the low pass filtering is so important for Genesis emulators, which is it's only been in the past couple of years that's really been a thing that people have focused on beefing up. But without any low pass filtering, it's just like nails on chalkboard. It's horrible. But
so there's this kind of scratchy sound to the music where everything sounds like it's an electric guitar, but kind of really scratchy nails and chalkboard kind of quality.
Gritty,
and it's like on my CRT TV, it doesn't sound that bad, but when I play it by emulation, it sounds like your ears are bleeding. Whereas I never found the Super Nintendo having that same issue.
Yeah, well, it's the analog circuitry of the Genesis sound path. Like I said, the low pass filtering is so important to making it not sound terrible. But for years and years and years, that just wasn't a thing that anybody cared about. They wanted the digital part of it to be right, and then they put that pure digital signal out. But it's just like, no, that's there's more to it, and if you don't get it, it's just going to be god awful. And that same mentality was applied to all emulation with CRT shaders and stuff, or in general CRT effects, that for years and years there were people who were, who they were like, well, I looked at these blurry CRTs for years and years, and that's I want the pure, clean, sharp pixels, and it's only been the past few years that people are coming back and saying, well, no, maybe a lot of the magic had to do with this analog side of it, the softness. I do have mixed feelings about the way some of the people approach that particular topic, though, of like the artist's intention and that kind of stuff, where it's like, we're pretty far removed from that, and these guys generally were like cranking these games out. Most of them didn't. These weren't works of passion. They were the contract workers, and they're like, you got 3 weeks to port this weird Japanese arcade game over to this console, and they're working on terrible deadlines. These guys were not like pouring their heart and soul into these games most of the time. So and even when they were, we're 30-40 years removed from that stuff. I don't think we can really go back and say this is what their intention was. I think we're kind of tail wagging the dog on that stuff.
I can see where you're coming from with that. Actually, there probably wasn't room for that many artists back then. Probably more business focused side of things. But I think I don't know if it's related to artistry, but maybe just they used shortcuts when they were developing, and they just used the inherent flaws of the screen too.
Yep. Well, and they had a ton of awesome tricks that are it's well established, like the half pixel trick. And
what's that one? What's the half pixel? What does that mean?
That's a thing that I forget which document it was. There's somebody, I think it was on some long form Tumblr thing of where somebody had done like interviews with a bunch of people that worked on games. And one of the things the engineer, like that was the cool thing about the time, is that the engineers and the artists were the same people. So it was these like technical guys doing technical tricks to do cool artsy stuff. And, there's a lot of disciplines like architecture, where it's these technical analytical dudes who and ladies, I don't mean that to be sexist, who are also creative, and to be able to flex both of those muscles and as part of your job is like that's what makes people passionate about those things. So the half pixel trick was they would say like, okay, this sprite looks a little funny, give me a half pixel here, and that's where they would take a pixel of a different color that when it's next to this other pixel generates a contour, particularly, a lot of times with like NTSC filtering or whatever, where they know that it's like, okay, if I stick this bright pixel over here, it's going to blend this other pixel in such a way that looks like gives me a half pixel, even though we don't have that granularity to do a half pixel. I can fake it by putting a bright pixel next to it. So in that case, it's like, yeah, these guys were friggin' wizards, and there is like, they obviously had an intention. So when I say that I don't dig on the artist's intention, I feel like they definitely did have an intention. I just don't think that we're able to say yay or nay at this point. It's like the constitutional originalists or whatever. It's like I don't think we can put words in these guys' mouths.
No.
This far removed. My philosophy on it is make the games look how they look good to you. Yes. That doesn't matter. Like a lot of people with the shaders are like, I want the most accurate shader. It's like, well, that's all subjective. Just pick the one that looks good to you. It doesn't matter if it does what emulates this weird CRT characteristic or not. Just pick the one that makes it look like you remember it. We're most people haven't looked at a CRT in 20 years, so it's like you don't even remember what it looked like. You have this vague idea, and just go with whatever scratches the itch for you.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And also a question that drops in the comments section of some of my shader videos is which shader's your favorite? Like, who do you prefer the work of the most? And I can never give a direct answer, because there's shaders for RGB, S-video, composite, RF, and then there's the different masks. There's like a trillion different permutations, and each system would need their own specific permutation. It's not even a one shader to rule them all approach.
Yep, right. Yeah, different games look better with different stuff, and same goes. I mean, like this. That's why I have a room full of CRTs that each one looks totally different.
Really?
So I've got my PVM aperture grills, then I've got my XM29 Plus here is a slot mask, and it's a multi-sync. So like if you feed a low res signal through it, the scan lines have really big gaps between them. The PC monitor is the same way, ultra sharp, and it's got a a dot mask, the little triad layout, but it's super fine pitch because it's a monitor, and yeah. And so I mean, they just look wildly different from each other. My 20-inch PVM looks wildly different from my 14-inch PVM. So I think a lot of people have the misconception that CRT is a CRT. They all look the same, and you move on. But with the shaders, since I maintain all of our shader repos for RetroArch, so I work on all the shaders all the time. To me, I mean, they're like my little babies. I love them. I love every one of them. I love the funky, weird interpolation shaders. I like the smoothing shaders like XBR and Scale effects that so many people rag on. Man, I love those things. What they do is super cool, and I love the math behind them. I love, they're genius shaders. They're awesome. The CRT shaders, I love the ones that are super lightweight, like ZFast CRT, that manages to, look really good, even though it like runs on a freaking calculator. It's crazy. But yeah, I love them all. They're all my babies.
That's actually very sweet to hear. That's actually kind of, that is kind of adorable, actually. with the blurring shaders, so like I don't know if blurring is even the correct terminology for it, but so stuff like Scale FX and the other one you just mentioned,
XBR,
XBR, that's the one. When I began like my experimenting with filters, I don't think they were even called shaders back in the day. Like I think they
it used to just be filters.
Yeah, I remember back then always going and using those blurring shaders or filters simply because it just made all the games look like cartoons.
Yeah, right. Which is talking about artist intention. Yeah, like that's, I mean, that's what they were going for with this stuff. They just didn't have the pixels. Like Super Mario World, if they could have given you a straight up like the 80s Super Mario cartoon, if they could have made it look like that, they would have. And that's what, those like smoothing blurring shaders, that's what they do, they make it look like a cartoon.
I mean, Super Mario World and Sonic and everything on the old CRTs, I don't like back then when I used to game, I don't even remember seeing pixels. It was all just a blur of color.
Yeah.
Whenever I did like an idiot, like go right, I'm pretty sure we all did this as a kid when you went right up to the screen and like put your eye right up against the glass.
Right.
I just remember not even being able to discern Mario's face. All I could see was just a bunch of blinding white light that would just like
with those little like RGB phosphor triads.
Yeah, but I didn't know what those were. Like, if anything, I've learned more about CRT TVs and the construction of them in the last 2 years. Going through the League Retro forums, looking at all the shader artists and all the preset artists. It's crazy. But
yeah, I never knew jack about CRTs when I was a kid, but I've had to learn a lot about them specifically to work on the shaders. My origin was when I was at college. I got my first college computer was a Bondi Blue iMac back in 2001. And while I was there, bored at college, sitting in my dorm room, that was when I found out about emulation. So I was late to it relatively. A lot of people have been doing it for years at that point. But so the first thing I did was I found out about MAME and SNES 9X. Those are the two things that I was like, oh man, I can use these on my Mac. They actually will work on it. So the first things I went to MAME, what is it, MAMEworld.dk or something like that, which is long defunct, but they had like it was like a smorgasbord as a kid. I was like, oh man, all these games that I used to pay so much money to play in an arcade, and here they're just sitting here. I remember getting X-Men Children of the Atom was the first MAME game I downloaded. And I was just like, oh man, this is breaking my mind. That, and then Tomato's translation of Final Fantasy V. Those were the first two games I emulated, and it was a mind-blowing experience. But one of the things was, even though the screen on that iMac was a CRT and it was not super high res, I was still like why is everything so weird and chunky? So I looked around in filters and stuff, and at the time they had scanline filters, which were just 50% total black lines between them. And I was like, what the hell is this supposed to be? I don't even get it. What, no TV looks like that. Why are they calling these TV filters? This is not what a TV looks like. I don't remember ever seeing any lines on anything. And I still hear people say that. They're like, my TV didn't have scan lines, and it's like, it 100% did. You just, you never got down there and looked at it, or you never used a connection that, like S video or whatever RGB that had the fidelity to be able to separate the lines that well. It totally had it. That's how they work, but you just didn't see them. But yeah, that was, now I love scan lines, even those just like super basic 50%. I don't really play without them. I almost always have them there just because I realize that's how it looks. And now all my CRTs, they all look like that, so I've become accustomed to it, but never as a kid.
Yeah, with those scan lines, or the separation lines rather, I don't remember experiencing them whatsoever when I was a kid. But I think the main reason was probably I played in RF and composite right up until the PlayStation 3. That was my first HDMI system. And
yeah, right.
Up until that day, I remember when I got the PS3 on the first day, it came with the composite cable. My one didn't come with the HDMI. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, right.
And I had to buy an HDMI. Actually, no, even the TV I had was a CRT. It wasn't even a flat panel.
Yeah, right.
thing.
Can't even hook up to it unless you had one of those like Sony Vegas.
Yeah. And but it's only recently, in the last year or so, I picked up. Do you know the RGB Duel by Recalbox?
Oh yeah,
Are you familiar with it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yes, it's the little hat for the the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
I plugged it into my CRT with SCART, and that was the first time in my life I'd seen pure 240p with the separation lines. It suddenly made sense why people talk about this, but it's the first time in my life I'd experienced that.
Yeah, it's a magic moment, man. Yeah, and that's I never got it when I first started out. I didn't even understand what the hell they were even trying to get across. Like, what is this supposed to be? What are these lines supposed to be? And they were always there. I mean, if you go to an arcade, unless it's a really beat up machine, I mean, you see them right there, but we just didn't see them when we were kids because that's the way TVs looked. That's just that's what it looked like. So it was invisible to you. And I think it's funny that because of the way that the scan line filter draws black lines, everybody thinks the black lines are the scan lines, but it's really the content. Those are the scan lines. The gaps in between them, those are the black lines. Yeah.
And also with the CRT screen, I vividly remember as a kid kind of looking away from the screen and then watching the screen with my peripheral vision, and then just seeing the screen flicker with my peripheral vision. And the funny I mean, my CRT even today still does that, because we run at 50 hertz over here. I think
so you say you're over in PAL land, so
yeah, unfortunately. And but the thing is, when I run it at 240p, it actually goes at 120 hertz.
Yes.
No, is it 120 or 100 hertz? And when I look at the screen with my peripheral vision, you don't see the flickering. And even on just a regular consumer screen, probably because it's like rendering half the lines at double the speed or something weird.
Half the line, double speed. Yep. And that was a big deal in PCs. It's really at like, I think they determined that like 85 hertz is where it stops being a deal. So that's why a lot of these like high end PC monitors that'll do like 1600 by 1200 at 85 hertz. That was, I mean, for one, that was like pushing the bandwidth of VGA, but also that was like, okay, that's the compromise where it's best of high refresh rate plus high res. So, at 85 hertz, we don't see the flicker. It doesn't cause headaches. I don't have a problem at 60 hertz, but since I've gotten into CRTs and stuff, I've played a lot of native PAL games. For example, on my multi-sync XM29 Plus over here, I got into GunCon games for PlayStation 2. So I've been playing a lot of those. And a lot of them are, like, for example, Virtua Cop on PS2 is PAL only, and it's interlaced. So it's 50 hertz interlaced. So it's really 25 hertz, like, flicker. And it is awful. I can't play it for very long because it's, and I was doing it, and I was just like playing it, and I was like, oh my God, these poor Europeans that have been stuck with this for forever, this PAL interlace is just, oh, what a mess.
Yeah. Sorry you had to experience that, man.
So I feel your pain, man.
I think the first time I'd ever noticed the difference between PAL and NTSC was one game, and it was when I downloaded the ROM, like back in school days or whenever it was, when I downloaded the ROM of Ninja Turtles for the NES.
Oh
Because
yeah.
that was like the first game I ever purchased in my life when I was a kid. That was I've got a box version of the cartridge over there in my cupboard, and I'm keeping it forever.
Oh man, that's awesome.
And it's the opening kind of attract mode of the game. So when you load it up, the NTSC version and the PAL version sound totally different.
Oh yeah,
Totally
right, right.
different. And I thought maybe the American version just had different music or whatever, but it was only years later when I realized it's because they run at different speeds. The music
Yeah.
sounds, the drums, everything
Yeah,
sounds totally
different
different.
feel. Yeah, yeah, it's like if you have a record player and you drop it down to 33 RPMs from 45 or whatever, or vice versa. It's like sounds totally different. It's a lot of music is unrecognizable, and all you've done is change the speed a little bit.
So obviously we met via RetroArch and whatnot. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
how did you even get caught up in that world, or what was the story that led up to that? Like was there an in between from you discovering emulation to you present day working within the RetroArch project?
Yeah, yeah. So for years and years, I was just a end user, and so I got into BSNES because that was the first program. Like I loved filters, and so BSNES was the first emulator that I know of that used shaders instead of filters, which was Mudlord was I think he was the first one that did that with. I think he was doing D3D 9 shaders on BSNES, and then eventually Near, the author of BSNES, started working with Screw Tape and the Maester for adding in XML shaders, which are the like the grandpappy of the ones that we have now. So I got into the BSNES just over the shader stuff in the very, very beginning because I thought that was cool. I was like, we're spending all of our CPU cycles just to try and emulate. We're barely making it at the time, particularly with BSNES. There was, a lot of computers couldn't even run it at full speed. It was like a crisis situation. So the idea of offloading a lot of that stuff over to the GPU was really, it was a revelation to me. I thought it was awesome. So I got involved with it there. And I had not too long earlier switched over to using Linux, but it was really hard to get any emulators in Linux. That was another thing that drew me to BSNES, was that it was portable, could compile it on Linux. And so I started doing a lot of builds of that. I still have my PPA. I still use Ubuntu, but that was what brought me to Ubuntu, was the fact that you could easily make packages and distribute them to people through these PPAs.
What's a PPA? Sorry.
Personal package archive. Personal package archive. Yeah. So the Canonical hosts these things. You can just sign up with them and publish packages to it. They'll build them on their build farm, and then people can add the PPA to their sources and download from there. So it was, back in, what was this, 2006 or something, 2007. That was a big deal. It's kind of, that was a new thing. It was very cool. And so I, being a Linux user, not able to get any emulators, I started making builds of BSNES and some other emulators. And then, so Near, called himself Bu at the time, and later changed it to Near, invented this idea. He really hated working on the front end of BSNES. It was really frustrating for him. He was constantly griping about bugs and the UI toolkits and stuff. So he hated doing it. So he was like, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to boil down the emulator to just a library. And that library is going to be what does the actual emulation. And then anybody can write a front end that will call this library, and they can add whatever features, because, people were always asking for this or that feature. He's like, I don't care about that. I'm not going to spend time on it. I'm focused on the emulation part of it. So that was his whole idea. Let people who care about emulators work on the emulator. Let people who care about the front end work on the front end. So the Maester at the time was in college studying computer science, and he was like, okay, he was also big into BSNES, and we all met at the BSNES forums. And so he was like, all right, well, I'm going to make a front end for it. And he called it SSNES, and that loaded up this libSNES library from BSNES. and that was great. So he, being a CS student, was learning about a lot of stuff, and whenever he would learn something new and cool in CS, he would go and add it to SSNES. It was like his playground. One of the things that he added was Near had just recently started doing the XML shaders, and so the Maester was like, all right, well, I'm going to make it so you can load two of them. You can load one after the other, and that was a really big thing. You could do a whole lot of really cool stuff. All of a sudden, you could do the CRT shader that CGWG and Dolls and the Maester had all worked on CRTG on, and which is still around, still one of my favorites.
Yeah,
love that guy. It's been around for years and years. And so you could take that, and then you could add a bloom shader after it, and all of a sudden that did the thing, that captured that. Oh yeah, that's what I remember seeing. That was really exciting.
That glowing screen,
yeah. So that was really exciting to me, and so that's how I got into doing the shader stuff. So I've been doing the builds, and then soon after that, Near was real interested in taking libSNES and getting it onto the PS3, because PS3 Homebrew was a brand new thing, and he was like, that'd be really awesome to be able to have accurate SNES emulation on this console. That would be a big deal. People would be able to play it on their CRTs, and it would be a whole big thing. So a bunch of guys worked real hard on it to try and make it happen. Blarg of the NTSC filter fame, he remoted into, I had this Power Mac G5 under my desk up at work that I gave him remote access to go in and work on the PowerPC 64 port of libco, which is kind of the heart of all of Near's emulators. They're all based around this co-threading library. And so he hand-tuned it for PowerPC 64 because it was really hard to get a PowerPC 64 system at the time. So I gave him remote access to that, and he worked on it. And everybody worked real hard, but we could never get BSNES faster than like 45 frames per second.
How many people are remoting into this machine at the moment and working?
It was really just Blarg. I gave him access to it, and he was going in and working. A bunch of people were working on different things. So the Maester was working on getting SSNES ported over to PS3 so it would work there. And then Blarg was getting libco, working on PowerPC 64. And Near was doing some various things, trying to optimize stuff to get it to go as fast as he could. Ended up being for naught. They never got it over 45 frames per second. Near lost interest and went over to work on other things. But while Maester was working on SSNES, that was when he hooked up with 20FX from RetroArch, who at the time, his deal was that he was porting emulators to PS3 because he was into PS3 Homebrew, and that was the thing that he was doing. And so he hooked up with him and was like, you've got this idea of, libSNES and SSNES, the front end and the back end. Can we, instead of me porting every emulator and its UI by hand, why don't we just use SSNES as the front end for all of them, and then we'll just attach this library to stuff. So that was how all of that stuff came about. Is they were like, oh well, okay, well we can just. Turns out that almost all emulators do almost all the same stuff. They all need to generate frames. They all need to push frames out to the front. They all need to take in gamepad input, turn it into stuff that it sends to the back end. So that idea of using libSNES as a generic library is what became libretro, and then SSNES became RetroArch. So with all that said, I was in the scene and involved with those guys just through that and with the shaders and stuff. And then just over time, I took on more and more stuff having to do with just the maintenance. I do a lot of stuff that is, dirty work that people don't, nobody wants to do it, but it needs to be done. So
sure.
I do a lot of that stuff. Like end user support. Nobody likes doing that. It's a real drag, but for whatever reason, I don't get too bummed out about it. I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing. So I compartmentalize a lot of that away, and have been doing that for, like 12 years, something like that, 12, 13 years. So yeah, I run our forums, I run the subreddit, and I do a lot of the support on Discord. And, so I help dozens of people a day, hundreds.
No, I know, because I see your name plastered everywhere.
Yeah. If you search for a problem with the RetroArch, you'll probably see me responding to it.
On the RetroArch Reddit, you don't need to throw a stone very far to see a reply from you.
Yeah. I try to at least interact with most, if not all, the posts, to let people know that it's like, yeah, there is somebody here. I may not have an answer for you, but I try to at least let people know they're being seen, not just shouting into the void.
Man, it's appreciated. You're doing God's work.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, man.
So you've been with RetroArch since the dawn of RetroArch,
Mm-hmm.
since before it was RetroArch. So before
Yeah,
so before it was Leave Retro, when it was
the SNES. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's been a wild ride. It's been really cool to see. Like I said, it was just Maester's little like playground for stuff he was messing with, and it's been neat to see it grow into something that now has millions of users and is used all over the place, and millions of users that don't even know they're using it through stuff like Batacera and RetroPie and stuff. It's
Yeah, Recalbox, all that stuff.
yeah. And and in a way, like I don't want to take too much credit for stuff, but in a way, the a lot of the single board computing revolution, is if you look at the projects that people do with it, yeah, there's some people making like automatic chicken opener doors and stuff, but most of what people are using it for is making little little barcades and stuff, and all that stuff would be a lot harder if not for RetroArch and LibRetro.
That is insane. Like I see these kind of crappy little mini console things on eBay and Etsy and everything, and everyone knows they're all based on RetroArch. Literally every single one of them.
It's a weird cottage industry, which people have mixed feelings about them. I have mixed feelings about them, but it's a thing that would be it's a lot harder to do if you have to take 150 disparate emulators and make them all work together, and they don't have the same options, they don't have the same inputs, they don't work with the same controllers, they don't have the same video drivers. It's just it's not really feasible to make a turnkey thing if you're having to deal with a bunch of different hardware and a bunch of different software. It's just too many variables.
So when I don't know, some dude or from outside the circle kind of has an emulator that they want to turn into a core so RetroArch can support, like, is it incumbent on the author of that emulator to meet some kind of minimum requirements so it can work with RetroArch, or does RetroArch do the heavy lifting, or how does that work?
So we used to make most of our cores in-house, where we would do most of the libretroization, and then we would then hand it off to the authors if they wanted it, but sometimes they wouldn't. We would maintain it. But in the past, it's been like 4 or 5 years now since we've made any in-house cores. It's always external parties, either the upstream author or somebody unrelated to either of us that's making all the cores these days. But the way it works is the libretro header has there's some stuff that's required, and then there's a bunch of stuff that's optional. Pretty much all they have to do is take whatever run loop their emulator already does, which is, like I said, they all do pretty much the same stuff for the most part. And so all you have to do is say, okay, this is the function that I use internally. Here's the libretro equivalent. I'm going to hook those up. You do that for the stuff that's required, and it works. And then after that, you can add more optional stuff. You can expose more options through it, that kind of thing. But it's a totally open ecosystem. There's no requirement as far as like, well, this feature from libretro isn't supported in here, so we don't, we ostracize it. We don't do any of that. It's totally open. We don't call any shots on who can do what. The only place where we have really any input as far as what goes on in the ecosystem is whether or not it shows up in the updater, because we have to, that all ties into our infrastructure that we pay for with the donations and stuff. We have to be able to integrate it in with our infrastructure, and that's the only place where we really say, hey, you have to do this stuff. If you want it to show up in there, we have to have, like, our recipe file has to be sitting in your repo, and it has to be usable with our various build farm images. But that's the only place where we really dictate anything about it. Other than that, it's totally up to whatever the author wants to do. If they want to make a sloppy slapdash port, they can do that. If they want to pour over it and really spend a lot of time on it, they can do that too. It's up to them.
The only place where you're actually asking for a certain level of standardization is just so the updating and and downloading experience can be smooth and user friendly.
Yeah, and there's a fair number of cores. I find them all the time where I'll just, out of nowhere be searching around on the internet and be like, oh, well shit, there's a libretro core I didn't even know about, where they'll have it just for download on their GitHub repo, and that's, I'll find it through that, and that'll be the only thing I've known about it. They've never talked to us about it. They don't have it integrated in the build farm or anything. It's just there for download, and you can drop it into your cores directory and off you go. Which is, and that's a really, like, I always, it puts a smile on my face whenever I find any of that stuff. I love that people are out there doing that kind of stuff without us even being involved. Same goes for front ends. I really wish that there were more front ends. I've been wishing for years, and been telling everybody that anytime somebody brings it up, I'm always like, if you want to make a front end, we could really use a classic computer front end that's, just set up for running these weird old classic computers, because RETROARCH is gamepad driven, and that's not always great for like some funky 8-bit UK home computer from 1984, but we've got those. So I really wish that somebody would make a front end that's like what it does is great for running these old computers. So I wish that we had more variety in the front ends. In that case, RETROARCH is kind of like tries to be all things for all people, which I think is a little bit of a bummer. I wish that we had more single purpose specialized front ends. There's BSNES QT and then ZMZ, which are both SNES specific libretro front ends, and I think that's great. I wish we had more of those, where it's like we've only got the options for these. Everything is laser focused on this one system, and it's great. But yeah, I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, I agree with you, because every kind of front end that I've seen for RETROARCH seems to be some mix-up, mashup of Emulation Station, and they all have the same vibe to them. It doesn't matter how different they try to make it; they all have the same vibe, and you can kind of smell it a mile away. Not that it's a bad thing or anything. It's just you're going to have to correct me if I've got this totally wrong, but the only one I've used where I feel like it just looks so different and behaves so different is, I think it's called RGB Pi.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah. The problem I have with all the like launcher setups is that, the whole idea with them, like that, people don't want to mess with RETROARCH because it's complicated, and they want to have a, like a easy mode turnkey thing. I don't feel like launchers really provide that. I don't like, I got one of those funky Chinese handhelds. They sent us one, and it came with, what is it? The EmuElec, which is another one of those emulation station plus RETROARCH and plus some other stuff. I did not find that it made anything easier. All it did was hid a bunch of stuff, which is like, okay, great. You don't see the stuff, but it didn't actually make it easier. And if there was ever a problem with anything, it made it a lot harder, because I didn't know what I was actually interacting with. I didn't know what a given option was really referring to. So if it was like, okay, well, I need to change the refresh rate, I had trouble knowing, okay, what am I doing here? If I change this option, what's actually getting changed in RETROARCH? So I felt like the launchers not only didn't make stuff easier, I felt like it made stuff harder, and it just obfuscated what was going on, which I thought was a bummer. That's the thing that I really wish that we could communicate easier in RETROARCH is that just because a setting is available doesn't mean that somebody should mess with it. Like, we expose all of the settings because we don't like having to go into config files, so we put all of the stuff right there in the UI. But it doesn't like when I set up a new RETROARCH system, it takes me 10 seconds to go from no RETROARCH installation to playing a game. It takes me no time at all, because the defaults are good enough. It's very rare that anybody needs to change a thing, but when people see options, they think, okay, I need to read this option, I need to understand it, and even if I don't understand it, I need to change it. And that's and that's not the case. Like, the defaults are fine for almost everybody, with very few exceptions. I don't know how to communicate that. I wish there were, unfortunately people don't RTFM, so it's not like I can put it on the docs like, don't mess with settings if you don't understand them.
Yeah, with RETROARCH, just, vanilla RetroArch, you're in a bit of a weird situation with that, with the settings, because those older emulators, like whether it was like Visual Boy Advance, or any of those old school emulators, like you open it up and you just go to File and Open, and you kind of have to go out of your way to go to options and preferences and whatnot. But with RetroArch, the moment you open it, everything is there. Like there's no hiding from it. It's like an extremely verbose front. I don't know if front end is the word, or UI.
Well, it's technical term is, that's the nomenclature change that I know it's, is we everybody uses front end for what we call launchers, which is, something that just launches another program through a command line. That we call those launchers. Everybody else calls them front ends. libretro has front ends and back ends, and front ends are stuff like RetroArch. So we like I said, we make that distinction. Nobody else does, and it's that's a thing that it's my like personal mission is to try and change everybody's language to suit what our language is, our nomenclature. Everybody's finally come around to cores, but maybe one day front end versus launcher will be a thing too. That's my personal battle. That that's my boulder I'm rolling up a hill that rolls back down every day. That's
I so love RetroArch and the fact that I can see all the settings, that whenever I do use a launcher like Emulation Station or something, I find it restricting because I don't have access to everything. And I've broken RetroArch. I break it on a weekly basis, especially when I'm doing my tutorial videos and guides. I break it all the time. I'm speaking to the shader preset authors all the time because I've broken something. Because when I make a video for them, I want to try to give it the the preset or whatever, the best representation. And so but the thing is, I can't. It's why I refuse to install things like Emulation Station and whatnot, because you just don't have access to everything. And
and it ends up making it harder if you want to actually try and do something. That was my experience 100%. And so I work in professional AV, and one of the things that we have as a guiding maxim when we make UIs is never give users the rope to hang themselves with, and that's we break that rule all the time in RetroArch, and people that understandably ding us for that. Is that we constantly like if there's one way to describe RetroArch, it's a big old box of rope for people to hang themselves with. That's you've got access to all these things that you can use to break the way it works, and that's not good UX. Like that's will readily admit that. But that one of the misconceptions that people have with RetroArch is that the idea is to make emulation easier and to be a beginner's on-ramp to emulation. That's not our intention with it at all.
It's the wrong product for that.
Yeah, exactly. If that's what you're looking for, you're barking up the wrong tree. And that's I think a lot of the frustration that people get out of RetroArch comes from that misconception that this is supposed to be easy. Why is it so hard? It's like making it easy is not like, we want to make it as easy as we can, but that is it's farther down on the list of priorities than having advanced options, exposing those options in a way that's accessible from a gamepad that can be used on any system. Those are our main design goals, and we succeed at those, I think. Making it an easy beginner's on-ramp, we biff that one for sure, because that's not one of our main goals.
If you want RetroArch with the stabilizer wheels, I think Ludo OS is brilliant for that. It's it's great. Perfect. I'd only just discovered it a couple of months ago when I made the video on it. I had no idea this thing even existed. Like it should be on the front page of the libretro forum or whatever.
We should be pushing it more. It's got a little bit of a complication in that it's made by this guy Kivitar, who is one of our previous contributors. He's a really good guy. He was the one who started Laka, and he made the XMB menu, which originally Laka used XMB as a launcher, but then he went in and made an actual menu driver out of it, so that it was integrated with the system, and that's a huge thing. We were R-GUI all the way at the time, and so having an XMB really brought us into the 21st century there, and that was a huge deal. So he stopped being a contributor because he had to go, IRL, real life called, and he had to go,
of course,
get a job and stuff. That's the main thing. Like RetroArch and LibRetro and a lot of open source stuff is dependent on volunteer labor, which pretty much means college kids. CS grad students, that kind of stuff, people who can devote a lot of hours to stuff and aren't really worried about money. Once they graduate, then they go off and they get real jobs. And a lot of times those jobs say, hey, you can't contribute anymore, or they just don't have the time and inclination anymore, because after you do something for 8 hours a day, who the hell wants to come home and do it for free? That's what happens to a lot of our contributors. Kivitar, that happened to him. But then he got a job with this company called PyPacker, who wanted to make a commercial emulation product, but they wanted to make it open source, which is cool. And the result of that is Ludo, which allows them to leverage the LibRetro ecosystem, and their way of giving back is by making Ludo open. And that's great. The only problem is that a lot of people don't like that it's a commercially, like corporate driven product. And so we've got, that's why we're not really like, pushing it, is that a lot of people are turned off by that. I don't personally have a problem with it. That's open. I mean, Linux, that's a corporate driven product right there. If it weren't for corporations contributing to Linux, we'd still be back in the Stone Age with it. I don't personally have a problem with that. Some people do. But nevertheless, Kivitar has really done amazing stuff with it, and it's great. Some people find it to be a little bit too training wheelsy, in that like you can't even configure a controller. If you plug it in, it's what you get, and that's all you get.
I think the thing I noticed with Ludo OS is it's the opposite of giving yourself enough rope to hang yourself. It's like it doesn't give you any rope to hang yourself. It's
yeah, right. So even if you need a rope for something, you don't have one. Yeah.
Out of all the kind of emulation experiences I've trialed, it just worked out of the box.
Yeah.
I installed it, it just worked, and I was just thinking like, why is this the first time I'm hearing about it? I think I only found out about it through the Discord, but prior to that, I had no idea it existed.
Yeah, and they only give you a subset of cores. You don't have to go pick them out. You don't have to know anything about the emulators. You don't even have to know what it is. It just you pick your game, and then it picks the thing that plays it, and off you go. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, and I think that it really does scratch that itch for those people. And I wish that I wish that more people used it. I wish more people knew about it.
Yeah, it's probably it's a similar reason why I like Lacquer as my kind of preferred Pi OS.
Yeah,
simply because it's like a very bloat-free version of RetroArch.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you plug it in and it has what it needs, and off you go. Yeah, I use it on a lot of my CRTs for that reason. It's an appliance.
Yeah. And have you got it connected via like Composite, or are you using something else?
I use so I take I don't have any RPi 4s. All I have is RPi 3s, and I take the HDMI out through one of those just like $6 dongle HDMI to VGAs, and then I run VGA over to VGA to RGBHV, like BNC splitter, and then I run that off to PVMs and stuff.
Okay. And it's all the sync is sorted out and everything.
Yeah, and I've messed around some with doing the composite output of the RPi to some of them, and that used to be a real drag back when, like, the big problem with it is that since it's all driven by a closed source firmware blob, we can't do anything with it. It's just what you get is what you get. But when they finally added the faux 240p to it, that's a huge benefit, because it had always been, it presents 740 by 480 to the OS and the software, so that's what they all see. But then when they made it do the double strike thing, so that it hits the set of field the same set every time, it still shows up as 480i to the OS or whatever, but you're only seeing the 240p version of it, and that stopped a lot of the flicker and gave you real scan lines and looks a whole lot better. That was a big improvement from the composite out that they used to have. So yeah, that was a big deal.
Yeah, I noticed with when I was playing some NES games, when I used to connect my old RPi 3 using composite as well, and I noticed it kind of recreates the same composite dancing that the old NES did with composite. So it's kind of cool just re-seeing that again.
Yeah, which because of the resolution it puts out, it can't do there's a test ROM for regular Nintendo that's the TV.NES is the name of it, but it's a NTSC artifact test ROM,
Okay.
and it won't pass the test because the resolution it puts out is different. But that's like, that's like hair splitting stuff. Like it like you said, it does the thing. It looks good. It captures what it's supposed to do. And again, it's like, as long as it does that, that's good enough. Like I think people get too wrapped up in minutia and details, and I think, just as a general thing with like retro gaming as a hobby, I think that's kind of a bummer to me, is that there's a lot of gatekeeping with the hobby, and a lot of people fixated on minutia, and they're like, if you're not doing it exactly like this, you're not doing it right. You're wasting your money on doing this thing. You really need to dump $1,000 into this setup so that you're doing it the right way, because if you're not doing it the right way, you're not you're doing a disservice to yourself and to history or whatever.
Yeah. What's like an illustration of a gatekeeping example?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to call anybody out.
No, please, no names. No names. Yeah.
A lot of stuff on YouTube is that way, where they're just like, if you're gonna do this, you need to have a PVM, you need to have an RGB connection, you need to have all your consoles modded for RGB. If you're doing anything less than that, you're wasting your time. That's
Understood.
Yeah, I have a big problem with that idea. And just as a little bit of a tangent, I think that all in all, I think modding consoles is a dead end, and I think that it's a thing that people should probably stop doing. A lot of the, like, for the most part, I think you're better off with something like an upscaler, like a RetroTink or a FrameMeister or something like that, and running whatever your console outputs into that up to a TV than trying to mod it for stuff, because a lot of these mods, we don't know how long they're going to be functioning. These consoles are already 30 years old. We don't know how much longer they have in them, but then if we go in there and chop them up and run these little FPGAs off of them and stuff, we don't know how long that stuff's going to last. No. So we could be shortening the life of our stuff. But on top of that, if you look at other numismatic hobbies, like you look at and retro gaming is not just a regular numismatic hobby, it's also, there's an element of utility to it. So that I think that something like classic car ownership, I think, is a better analog, or like antique tool ownership. You have to keep it usable, so that's important, and that's why a lot of people want to mod them, is because they're like, well, I want it to be usable, and I get that, and that's important. But if you look at classic cars, it's more valuable and more desired to have an all original classic car that's in kind of bunged up shape than it is to have one that's got an engine swap, and like, all that's left is the look of it, but it was all rusted out, and so they bondoed the whole thing, and it's essentially made from scratch, and everything in it's new. That's worth less than one that's kind of busted up but still all original. And I think that we're gonna have that same thing. Like, everybody wants to retro bright their consoles, makes them look brighter and cleaner, but it doesn't do anything to the brittleness of the plastic. I've got an old Super Nintendo that, like, you can poke your finger right through the plastic because it's old and brittle, but it looks like it's brand new because of retro brighting. If you were to do that to a numismatic coin, you'd have knocked off like 40% of the value or something just by wiping the tarnish off. That's part of the character. That patina is part of its value. It's part of its history. Same thing if I get a cart that has, Adam written on it in Sharpie. I don't sit there with a magic eraser and try and get that off. That's the history of that cart. Adam loved this freaking thing, and he wrote his name on it because he let his buddy borrow it at the playground and wanted to have his name on it. So it came back to him a couple weeks later. Like, that's what makes this stuff special, is the history behind it. And I don't think we should erase it. I don't think we should try and wipe it away or hide it. I think we should celebrate it.
I've got a few box cartridges for my NES where on the back they've got like a sticker from a video game magazine from the 90s. We used to have this magazine called Games Master that used to come out here. We also had a TV show called Games Master in the early 90s.
I think I've seen some of the TV shows on YouTube.
Yeah. And they took the sticker that must have come with the magazine. This cartridge belongs to, and it's like two names like Emily and Charlie or something. And a part of me wants to put a post out on Reddit with the picture of the cartridge. Like, can we find out who these people are, just so I could say hello or something? And like, I've got other cartridges where I purposefully kept the price sticker on
Yeah.
simply because those stores don't exist anymore.
Right. Yeah. KB
And
Toys and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, so you guys had KB, so that was pretty big in America,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And doesn't exist anymore. Hasn't existed for a long ass time. Yeah.
No, no.
But you see that sticker and it takes you back to being 9 years old, digging through a bin of games, Yeah.
Oh, when you find a receipt for an old game
Yeah.
still in the box
Yeah,
or
like
something.
folded up and stuck in a manual or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't have any of my manuals anymore except some guy gave me a bunch of retro stuff that was all like, still shrink wrapped. He just would cut the shrink wrap and pull the carts out. And so
Really?
his stuff is all in pristine condition. He just gave it to me. I guess he was just, rode that horse long enough and figured he was done. But
Yeah.
so I don't have any of the old manuals, but man, I loved renting a game and having the manual and open it up, going to the notes section and seeing just like whatever crazy crap some kid wrote about the game, like whatever they felt was important about it, and it's all, like written in like, like little broken like kid writing and stuff. I love
that. Oh man, I was one of those idiots when I was a kid. Like I would just scribble in the manuals and color over the black and white artwork that was in those things.
Yeah, and that's the history of this stuff. That's when people talk about like trying to recapture their childhood, like that's what we're trying to do, not look at it in pristine RGB on a PVM. Nobody was playing like that. It's a different thing. It's got its value. Shit, I've got all this stuff to do that, and I do that regularly, but that's it's not exciting to me.
I emulate everything, and the thought of playing an old game on original hardware, even though I've got like every Nintendo console like sitting in a box somewhere, but I just don't use them. And simply because emulation is at that point where it's so good and so convenient. Like whenever I do play like an older game, the fact that I can't rewind or save state or do a screenshot there and then, oh man, it's so frustrating. And so the only modern consoles I've got are, so I've got a PS5 and a Steam Deck. And on those systems, I can't rewind, and it infuriates me. And I don't know how you feel about that when playing modern games, if you do play modern games.
I do play some modern games. That's part of why I always come back to old games, is that for one thing, I'm very comfortable with the limitations because I've been dealing with them since I was a kid. But on the other hand, all the quality of life stuff that we've been able to add to emulation is really makes that stuff a lot better, a lot easier, a lot more palatable. I used to emulate a lot more than I do now. Now the main game I play is Support Hero. So when I would be playing games, I'd support people, which sucks.
Man.
But so I don't emulate nearly as much as I used to. But so actually, I'm kind of on the other end, is where I barely play any games through emulation. I honestly don't play much on my consoles anymore. I just recently unhooked them all and threw them in a box just because I needed more room for synthesizers. But got to pick your priorities. But when I did, so I also I don't consider myself an audiophile, but like I said, I'm a professional AV guy, so I deal with a lot of audio stuff, and I care about that. And I listen to I have a turntable, and most of the music I listen to is through records, not because I think they're superior or anything, but what that brings me to is I like to play through my consoles for the same reason I like to put records on, not because I think it's better, because it's not. I think it's empirically worse, but because it forces me to one, make a choice. It's very different picking a record out than it is you put it in and you listen to the whole thing, and it's a hassle to change it out. So you're going to listen to the whole damn record. You're not going to just be like, oh, this song sucks, I'm going to the next one out of my list of 5 million songs. So it forces you to interact with it, and it forces you to find value in things that you would normally think of as bad. Like if there's a song that's not my favorite on an album, it's a big pain in the ass to try and skip it. I have to go over and pick the needle up and move it. So I'm just going to sit through that song and deal with it, and maybe find a way to appreciate it. Same way with banging your head against a hard part of a video game. Sure, you could just save scum your way through it if you were on an emulator, but forcing yourself to appreciate the difficulty, or appreciate it, even if that appreciation is like, oh my god, I hate it so much, like that's that it makes you feel something that you wouldn't have felt otherwise. And I think there's some value to that.
100%. And I think it goes back to your Karate Kid example at the beginning. Like if that was on a ROM cartridge, you probably would never have played it.
yeah. Nobody plays that piece of crap game because it sucks. But I spent so many years on it, and I can still play through it because I invested that, and I can appreciate, even the super frustrating parts like the stupid typhoon where the stuff knocks you into the holes all the time. That is without a doubt super frustrating, poor design, but nevertheless I appreciate it, and when I make it through, it's very rewarding. I never would have experienced that just through emulation. I would have said, this game sucks, bring on the next.
My similar experience to that is Marble Madness on the NES.
Oh yeah.
And I picked that up for £5 back in like '93 from a what would be the equivalent of like a yard sale type place.
Yeah, right.
And but yeah, I love that game so much. I've got 2 boxed copies of it just in case one breaks or one gets lost for no reason. And it's dirt cheap to buy. Like you could pick it up for like £5 here or something. Like
you should get a third one. Triples is safest.
I'll do that just for you.
Yeah. But yeah, and yeah, but if you weren't stuck with it and you didn't have to play it, then you wouldn't have an appreciation for it. You just say, man, this game controls bizarrely. I'm not going to mess with this.
Yeah, you end up forming a strange relationship with it, and quite an intimate relationship with it in a way you wouldn't with a ROM cartridge or ROM CD or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I feel the same way with music and stuff. Like I said, that's why I mostly listen to records. Is not because of any superiority. Like that's people always talk about like records sound better. It's like they 100% do not. But I like the way they sound. They do not sound better, but I like the way they sound. But it's the taking it warts and all, and appreciating it as a unit. That's the part that I think is missing from a lot of our modern interaction with games and music and stuff. Everything's all you can eat. We all suffer from the paradox of choice or whatever.
That's very true. Yeah, I actually really appreciate your realistic approach to this stuff, because anytime I've ever spoken to anyone who appreciates records more than MP3s or whatever, they always use a million descriptive words like this. It's got a warmer sound, man. Yeah. It's like
stuff drives me crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I can't personally tell the difference, but yeah, it's actually refreshing hearing your thoughts on this. Yeah,
it's from a technical standpoint, when somebody says something sounds warm, what they mean is it sounds bad in a good way.
I'll take it.
Yeah, it sounds bad in a way that I like. It's a big thing in audiophile circles. They always talk about how stuff sounds musical. It's like that doesn't mean anything. That's BS. Like there's no such thing as something sounding musical. That just means it's sounds bad in a way that I like.
So with the guys that you created RetroArch with, did you ever I love how you painted the story, and it sounds like this ragtag group of people that just kind of found each other on the internet. Did you guys ever have a drink together? Did you ever meet each other in real life or anything?
No. 20FX, I have been on a conference call with him once with some company that was trying to skis us into doing a bunch of work for essentially free. That's the only time I've heard his voice. I've never met any of them. It's funny. I've never met any of them in person. There have only been a few times that I've met anybody who's actually even heard of RetroArch IRL. I've had a couple of kids that I've run into where they're like, "Oh, what is it you're doing over on your TV there?" And it's like, "Oh, that's RetroArch, the thing I work on." And I was like, "Oh, wow, you work on that." But that's as far as I've only had a handful of people ever even know about it, which is it's funny because it's a pretty ubiquitous thing. So it's weird to not really run into that. But like I said, I compartmentalize that part of my life. My wife knows I do a thing, and that's what I when I'm sitting over the computer, that's what I do. She knows I like to do math that make video game stuff happen, and that's about as much as she knows about the shaders and stuff. And that's that's the way I like it. I'm like the Seinfeld separate worlds theory guy. I like to keep my worlds separate. I don't mix my virtual and my IRL that much.
It's interesting how when you say ubiquitous, because I went for years saying we're going to use emulators, or I want to use emulators, to now saying I'm just going to run it in RetroArch. It's like the same way when Google came and people don't say search anymore. They say we're going to Google it.
Yeah. There's that Netflix movie. What was it? It was their interactive movie. I forget what it was called. Where there's like a video. The Black Mirror movie. Yeah, where there's like
Bandersnatch.
Yeah. yeah, and there's like a video game element to it where it's like this old video game, and he mentions he's like, yeah, so I fired it up in RetroArch, and that was it's funny to have that, that's like a weird thing to see, to be like, oh man, that's a thing that is this one part of my life. It's weird to see it in another part of it. But for two, that it's, some people were salty about them mentioning RetroArch instead of, whatever standalone emulator or whatever. But it's just
I might be thinking about the wrong episode then. I don't think I've seen this episode.
Oh, well, let me look it up real quick. Hang on a second.
Yeah, because I think the one I watched, the one about the video games, was set in like the 80s, the early 80s. It was like a pick choose your own adventure episode. Like,
yeah, no, that's the one. Yeah. Yeah, let's see. I think that's it. Sorry if you hear my tippity tap in here.
That's okay. To be honest, I've not watched that episode in about 3 years or 4 years, whenever it first came out.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's it was Bandersnatch. Yeah, he says I ran it on an emulator, RetroArch. Yeah, and which I don't know if he says RetroArch or RetroArch. I don't recall, but yeah, that's another big thing. A lot of the UK folks call it RetroArch. All of us say RetroArch, but there's no official pronunciation, so either one is equally valid.
I was going to ask you actually what the official way of saying it is. I've always called it RetroArch.
Yeah,
I've met very few people that call it RetroArch.
Yeah, it's like I said, it seems to be mostly UK people for whatever reason will say it, and I don't really know why.
Because we're a bunch of idiots, that's why.
But yeah, it's but there's no official pronunciation, so it's like, either way is fine. People ask us that a lot, and it's like, no, whatever floats your boat, buddy.
I think it's time you decided on an official way to say it.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna do it. I don't have that jurisdiction. I can't really make that choice.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. How many of you guys are still actively developing this then? Like, I'm guessing, are the original team still doing it? Or was it just you and your own, or what's going on?
So that's another misconception. A lot of people think that that there's a huge team behind it, but really there's, contributors come and go. Like I said, it's mostly college kids that contribute. There's really only about 10 people that are regularly contributing at a time. There's 28FX still around. He changes his nickname all the time. So, 28FX is what he was for years. So we frequently still call him that in the third person. But so he's still around. The Maester is still around some, but he doesn't really do much work on it. He still advises on a couple of things, usually related to Vulkan, because he's deeply involved in the development of Vulkan. He's a contractor for Valve these days. Yeah. Oh yeah. He's a big deal. He's a super smart dude, and that's RetroArch owes a lot to him. Like he laid the groundwork for everything, and he's the reason we had a Vulkan driver on day zero, was because he was working on making Vulkan, and so that was part of how he tested it. Was he gave us a driver and was like, here you go, as soon as Vulkan drops, this is going to work.
It's my favorite video driver to use in RetroArch.
Yeah, right. It's awesome. Yeah, and so we owe a ton of stuff to the Maester, and it's really awesome that he hangs around and is willing to still help us out with stuff. He's a busy guy, so he doesn't always he's not out there like digging around and stuff, but he's been very good about making himself available for when we have questions about like Vulkan validation and that kind of stuff. So and he does get his hands dirty sometimes with like weird driver stuff that we would just be up a creek trying to figure out. So so he's still around. Like I say, he doesn't contribute much anymore, but he's still around, and we value that a lot.
Awesome.
But yeah, so but the contributor scape has changed a lot. Usually people are around for 2 or 3 years while they're in college, and then they take off. And I am really grateful that continues to happen, and that people give us their time in that way. That's the only thing that makes open source work, is people willing to work for free. And so for people to come in and give us their free labor and work on a thing, then that's really important. And I'm really grateful for that. And that's brings me to another big misconception with RetroArch, is that there's no real design ethos behind it, as far as, which is not going to surprise many people, because it is like a weird cobbled together thing that a lot of people consider stuff bloat. But what it is we're really accepting of contributions more than any open source project I know of. So pretty much anything somebody contributes will probably make its way in some way or another. don't turn people away very often. But the big, if there is a design ethos, it's we're making the program that we want to use. And so we were all people that loved emulators. We loved emulating. We loved these old consoles. And so when there's a thing that we want to be able to do, we work to make it happen. And that's, we're together making the program that we want to use. And so if somebody has a thing where they're, that's like classic open source developer deflection is PR is welcome. Like, oh yeah, you want to gripe about something? Well, pull request welcome. Send us a PR and we'll, whatever. But it's really, that's, most people mean it as like, whatever, put up or shut up, quit bugging me. But we really mean it. We really mean it. If you want to see something happen, send us a PR. It will probably make its way in. We may, make you have to change stuff so that it conforms to our coding style and stuff, but it'll probably make it in. If there's a thing in there that's pissing you off about the way it works, change it. We'll take it. Same goes for documentation. Like that's a thing that anybody can do. If there's a thing that you find that's poorly explained or not explained somewhere, send us a PR for our doc site. We'll put it on there, man. So that goes for anybody. Anybody that wants to help, we'll take it.
You've kind of turned my brain inside out a little bit, because in my head all this time I just assumed there was hundreds of people around the world working on RetroArch, like at any given time. I had no idea it was such a small team.
Yeah, no, it's a very small team. Yeah, and that's why it's so important that we accept pretty much whatever anybody's willing to throw our way, because it's a massive ecosystem with a ton of work involved. And it takes, that, like I said, I do a lot of dirty work. I do a lot of the glue. So like the stuff that's required to just keep things functioning as a unit, I do a lot of that. Same for TwinApex. He does, a lot of stuff that's just like, nobody wants to do that stuff, but somebody needs to do it or the ecosystem falls apart. And that's, so at this point, we spend a lot of time just trying to make it so that people can contribute and so that their contributions can make it in. Because, without those contributions, we got nothing.
Wow. Okay. So what's made you stick around so long when everyone else keeps leaving?
Well, I am in a position where I've got some free time. I've had to cut back on how much time I spend on it at home because it was, it's cutting into my home family life. So I now don't get on Discord in the evenings and on weekends, just because that's my family time. But I'm in a position at my job where I can keep Discord open and I can check the subreddit 3 or 4 times a day and keep a handle on that. So I'm in a situation in my life where I can do that stuff. My job doesn't have any restrictions on contributing to open source code. So that's another problem. A lot of people who they go to college for CS and they contribute while they're in college, and then they graduate and they go to a job and the job says you have to do all of these weird CLA stuff where anything you write at work or at home is our property and a lot of that stuff. And that kills a lot of our contributors right there, where they're like, sorry, I got a job and they own everything I write, so I can't contribute anymore. That happened with maybe it was Toad King, who was the main force behind the Wii port. That's why the Wii port's kind of been a piece of garbage since he left, because it was his baby. He kept it great, but he got a IRL job that broke his ability to contribute, and that was that.
And nobody else decided to pick it up, or was it just abandoned? Or
yeah, and so we fix stuff when we can, and we've got some guys that are that still contribute to the Wii stuff, and that's, again, we very much appreciate that. But it was really Toad King's baby, and that's another thing that a lot of people don't understand, is they're like, oh, why did you spend this time to make a Windows 98 or a DOS port of RetroArch? That's stupid. You should be working on the Windows port because that's all anybody uses. Like, well, I get that idea, but since contributors are just whoever wants to work on a thing, that doesn't, like, time that person spends does not mean time taken away from something else, because since it's all volunteer, they're not going to work on something they don't want to work on anyway.
Yeah.
People have been saying for years that we need to change our input system. Like, okay, well, that's a huge job and nobody wants to do it.
What does that mean, change the input system? What does that mean?
People just plain old don't like it. People don't like it. People don't like the way our input stuff works. I get it. They don't like the idea of the RetroPad. They don't want to interact with it. They don't want to think about it. I get it. But unless somebody wants to come in and rewrite the whole thing, that ain't changing, and nobody wants to rewrite it. Everybody who would be able to do it likes it. So it's not going to change unless that changes.
Oh, I see. So if you really want to see change, you kind of have to be the change.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, nobody's going to like it's all volunteer work. Nobody's going to do something that they don't want to do. So, to go back to like the DOS thing, there was a guy who wanted to make a DOS port. So he made a DOS port. He wasn't going to work on anything else other than that. That was just the thing that he was doing. And, that's just the way it goes. He did what he wanted to do and then he left.
And that's still working in the background. There's a DOS version of RetroArch.
Still
all thanks to this dude.
Yeah, and if something breaks on it at some point, then somebody else who uses it will come in and fix it, or they won't.
Wow. So do you have versions of RetroArch for a particular platform where you've just had to kind of sunset it because no one's come in to fix a game, a system breaking bug or something?
I think the Wii and the PS3 ports are really probably the closest thing to that, or and the Xbox 360 port, honestly, where it's like, yeah, there's some stuff keeping it from working, so people are just stuck with this old version, and maybe somebody will come in and fix it. Like that stuff all still exists in the code base, so if somebody fixes the root problem, boom, it'll all be there and it'll all be modern. But whatever is keeping it from happening, there's just that's not happening. That's one of the good things about the way RetroArch is constructed, is that it's all very modular. So the rest of the code base can progress. And as soon as somebody fixes that one problem that's blocking it, boom, they get everything. And it's, 100%. But, until that happens, they're stuck on whatever weird old version would actually compile or whatever.
Oh, that's amazing that it's modular. So how you've described it is actually there's hope if someone can come in and just fix that little bug and whatnot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that's a big design idea that end users don't really care about it and don't really get exposed to it anyway. But from a development standpoint, everything in the libretro ecosystem is designed around the idea of a developer can take, like, the way the libretroization works with cores is we try to, as much as possible, make it so it's a single library that all it requires is no external dependencies, just a C compiler. So that way, like, these GUI toolkits come and go. So like that was a big thing that blocked when I got into emulation. Couldn't use a bunch of emulators on Linux. Excuse me, because they didn't have the GUI toolkits, because a lot of these emulators at the time were Windows only. They were built using Win32, and you couldn't do any of that stuff except through Wine, which at the time was pretty rudimentary too. And so all of that stuff was all tangled up in the emulation code. So they were totally confined to their platform. So we were like, okay, we spent a lot of time cutting all that stuff out, getting it down to just the emulation core, hence the term core. And then you compile that down to a single library. Then you can take that library, and then if a new GUI toolkit comes out, a new device comes out, a new platform comes out, all you got to do is write a couple of drivers to hook up this stuff, and boom, all of those libretro cores work. And that's the idea, is that we wanted to make it so that it's a hop, skip, and a jump to having everything else. All you have to do is do a couple of little things, boom, you get everything else. And that's how all of it works.
So it's kind of like I don't know, would object-oriented programming, like they'd leap to that?
Yeah. The idea that if you make, it's pretty much like Legos, you build these blocks, and once you have the stuff for one of the blocks, it works. A whole bunch of other stuff works, and if something doesn't work, all you have to do is provide whatever little bridge it needs, and then all that stuff works too. And it's, like I said, it's what lets all of these single board computer emulation things let them explode, because otherwise you'd have one guy who's like, well, I ported this one emulator, and then and I ported these two others, but that's all you're getting because that's all I care about. Instead, it's like, no, you do this one thing, you get 150 of them.
So say stuff like Dolphin, PCSX2, some of these kind of really chunky cores. Are there people on those projects working on getting something into RetroArch, do you think? Or because I think I tried the PCSX2 one, but I found the standalone one just ran a little bit better.
Yeah, the current core for PCSX2, the LRPS2 we call it, is it was never meant for mass consumption. It was really just meant as a preview. That's why it has the alpha tag, but people all use it like it's production ready, and that's a lot of political stuff of the teams are doing their own thing, and that's fine. They don't have to be, they don't have to want to do RetroArch stuff. That's,
sure.
I get it. That's fine. Yeah. So We had like, so PCSX2's team is not a monolith either. Some people were into us making a core, some people weren't. That's I think ultimately they fit, like the consensus fell and they didn't want to do it, and that's fine. But there were some people who were into it, but not anymore. So we're still working on making those cores better. But again, it's it's hard to do that stuff as a code base outsider. Like it's we're stretched pretty thin just dealing with the stuff that we got. So
of course,
keeping up what we've got is hard for us to go learn a new code base. Plus, a lot of these code bases like PCSX2 and Dolphin, those are super complex code bases that use really like cutting edge technology, and it's it's hard to just like hook into that stuff not knowing anything about it. So we really do depend on there being somebody who's familiar with it, whether it's somebody on their team or somebody external who takes the time to learn their code base to be able to make the cores out of them. Because if we try and do them internally, we don't get very far frequently. That's the supermodel core that 20FX promised years ago. People still hassle about where's supermodel core, and it's like, well, turns out it's complicated. He tried to work on it and then got stuck real quick. Stuff happens.
So cores like that, is it, I mean, maybe this might be naive to say, is it worth removing them from the RetroArch list, just so people don't get confused, or they load it up and they're like, why doesn't this work? What's wrong with it?
We have a flag for experimental. If I had my druthers, we would have put the LRPS2 core behind that flag. But a bunch of people wanted to use it on Xbox is really the main reason it's as widely distributed as it is. The Dolphin core catches a lot of flack, but I mean, it works. I've played through games in it. It does the thing. It plays games. It's so I think that it gets a worse rap than it deserves. It does it fine. It's not they're the thing everybody always says standalone's better. Okay, sure, yeah, that's fine. But there's a lot of inertia if you're invested in the RetroArch and libretro ecosystem of like, well, I just want everything to work through that because I've already got it all set up, and it takes me 10 seconds to add in a new thing, and that's the way I like it. For me, I dog food RetroArch and have for years. I haven't used any emulators outside of RetroArch in a long time, just because it's what I use. And so, for me, if I want to play a Wii game through an emulator, I'm going to have to do it through the Dolphin libretro core, even if standalone, shoots rainbows out of its butt. I'm invested in the ecosystem. So what am I going to do?
It's just convenient, massively convenient. And RetroArch provides so many added extra benefits to it as well. And it's just with RetroArch, if you know how to use one core, you kind of know how to use all of them.
Right. Yeah. And so that kind of like, keeps me fenced in on it too, that it's like, well, I could go download this other emulator and I could go figure out how the hell it works. And I could, see if my controller's supported in it. And I can devote several hours to trying to get this one game to run, or I can just have what admittedly may be a suboptimal experience in RetroArch, but it takes me 10 seconds to do it.
Yeah. Wow. You've blown my mind today. I feel like I've learned more about RetroArch in this last hour or whatever than I have in the last few years. This is crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to answer questions anytime, man. Yeah. It's not a thing that like, I don't think that it's, that's another misconception, is that people think that we're trying to like take over stuff. Nothing like that. Sure. Like if people want to use standalone emulators, great. Like that's standalone emulators. Like I say on the rule 3 on the subreddit, it's like we love standalones. That's if we didn't love them, there wouldn't be cores of them. But that's if somebody's into that, that's great. There are some people who are like, oh yeah, I don't use any multi-emu, standalone forever. Okay, great. Yeah, whatever, man, whatever gets you going. It's I like using stuff through RetroArch. I work on the program that I want to create. Just the other day, I made a change on something because I was like, well, this needs to happen, so I'm going to make it happen. So that liberation, that freedom of being able to, just make any changes that I want to and have that work for me and hopefully work for other people is what keeps me on it rather than using a standalone.
Yeah. I mean, I can't thank you enough for all the contributions you've made, and
Oh man,
the
no worries.
support, I can't imagine how many messages you're constantly replying to on Reddit
Yeah,
every day and
yeah.
Discord, and yeah, I think you need to be on the RetroArch payroll, man.
Yeah, well, no, nobody is. That's
Yeah.
the thing. None of us are making any money. So, yeah, it's a thing that we do. We give away for free, and so I just as a little thing about me, I went to college for writing, and I studied creative writing, and I went right out of college and got a job as a professional writer, and I did that, worked my butt off. It turns out that is not a very viable career as far as it's kind of a sweatshop, and so
Oh
I did
man.
that day in, day out. And because of that, I no longer write at all for pleasure. If I'm going to write something, it's because somebody's paying me to do it. And so I don't want to be paid for anything I do for RetroArch. There have been times where it's like, well, do you want to make some money doing this thing? Nope. I get contacted by companies all the time that are like, hey, we'll pay you a contract to do this thing. Nope, I will not do it, because that's whatever I do for free is my choice. It's my hobby. It's what I choose to do. If I get paid for it, that's my job, and I hate work. So I never want to be paid for RetroArch because I don't want that to be my job.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have any kind of companies or corporations ever contributed towards RetroArch, whether it's financially or just to support the development?
There was a single board computer company, hard OC, I forget, hard something, hard whatever. They made some single board computers that were kind of like Raspberry Pi competitors. And they used to donate to us every month, but I think they quit that a few years ago. And then 8-bit do or 8-bit do that makes the
Oh, really?
controllers. They've given us auto config profiles. That's as much as they've contributed, but hey, we're thankful for that too.
Yeah.
Their stuff is auto configured properly. That was really cool of them. I wish that more companies did do that kind of stuff. I know that a lot of them, from talking to a lot of them, they're afraid to contribute to stuff because they feel like that gives them obligation that they can't live up to. I think that's a bummer, and I wish that wasn't a feeling. There's a lot more that companies could do for open source, and specifically for RetroArch and LibRetro. So many companies do use it. I wish that they would do freaking anything. Like if they would, close a bug report or something, or open a bug report. Hell, like I wish that they would do anything, but most of them don't, and that's a bummer. But yeah, it is what it is.
That's a real shame. Well, I mean, it's good to hear that 8-bit do had contributed in their small way. It would be awesome if other companies like, I don't know, Retrobit, Hyperkin, just all these kind of retro focused peripheral companies. Like, I mean, is there like a credit section inside RetroArch somewhere where you can see everyone who's contributed to it in the last however many years? And
if you go to GitHub, you can see the contributors list, which is super long, hundreds of people. And those are the people that they put code in RetroArch, and which each of the cores, the core contributors, which is, I mean, honestly, most of what I do, I don't do a whole lot in RetroArch specifically as far as its front end code and stuff. That's what I did this past weekend, but I don't do that very often. Most of what I do is little odds and ends and cores, and then the shader stuff. So my contributions don't really show up that much. I'm fairly low down on the list of contributors for RetroArch, but that's those people don't show up in that list, but they show up in their own lists. But yeah, but there's, like I said, people come and go. So over time, there's just been so many of them for so many different things and stuff we don't even know about. Like these, like I said, the cores that I just stumble across. Like I don't even know anybody who's related to that stuff, but they've in their way helped.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Do you keep in touch quite regularly with the shader preset authors? Yeah,
mostly through the forums. But there's on Discord we have a shader programming channel where a lot of us, Coco, who does the Coco AIO, and then Guest is on there, and me, and Hyperspace Madness. We're all over there, and we're all on the
all
forum.
the big dogs.
And, yeah. We're all there. So the shader programming channel I really like. That's a lot of why I still work on the shaders has to do with, programming is fun. It's fun to figure out, like, how can we optimize this function? How can we make these effects work together? And I love the immediacy of shaders. That's like you diddle some numbers, you change some math, and then it hit compile, and boom, you see the difference. With regular programming, a lot of times it's kind of abstract, like what your changes do. But with shaders, it's like it's right there, pops right out at you. I love it.
Well, you can see it, and even a lay person that knows absolutely nothing about coding can tell the difference.
Yeah. I plan to get my daughter into it eventually. That's how I want to get her into programming, is through shader stuff, because it's like it's so immediate, so tactile.
Is she old enough to know what you do?
A little bit, when I've set up RetroArch on some stuff for her, and I'm like, yeah, this is a thing. This is the thing I work on. This is something I made.
That's sweet, man.
Yeah. So I don't know how much, I don't think she understands like the implications of it, but maybe sometime. One day,
man. I just want to ask you one final question before I let you go. And I asked all of the guests I've had on the podcast that you've been stranded on a desert island, and you can only take 3 consoles or 3 game systems with you. With each of those 3 systems, you're allowed to take 3 games.
Okay.
So what do you do? What do you take?
2 of them I got no brainers, and I know exactly. I'd do Super Nintendo, and I would take Super Metroid, Final Fantasy 6 or 3, depending on your region, and Super Mario World.
Oh, easy. That's the quickest answer I've seen.
yeah, I think about this sometimes. Yeah, it's Super Mario World and Chrono Trigger. It's a toss-up.
Choose one.
Yeah. If I got to choose one, I'm going to go with Super Mario World, because if I got to choose one JRPG, it's going to be Final Fantasy 6 over Chrono Trigger. So
interesting. Yeah. I would have preferred Chrono Trigger to Final Fantasy.
Well, they're both gems. Yeah. Then PlayStation 1 would be number 2. And I would get Armored Core, Vandal Hearts 1, and what other game would I get on it? Those are the main ones I play. God, I guess I'd choose Final Fantasy 7, even though I've decided that's a bad game. We don't need to get into why I think that, but I think it's a crappy game. But I'd probably get
another
it anyway.
episode.
Yeah, right. And then. Geez, what would be my third one? Does CPS2 count?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, CPS2, and I'd just get a Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and let's see, what would be my third one? What else would I do on CPS2? Oh, Pro Gear.
Okay, why 2 Street Fighter games on CPS2?
Oh, because I freaking love them, man. I love them. Super Turbo, just because that's it's what everybody plays. That's the tournament Street Fighter. If I'm on a desert island, I got to keep my skills up in case I get rescued at some point. And Hyper Fighting, because I love it. Actually, I guess Hyper Fighting is CPS1, so maybe that doesn't even count. Well, you gonna give me that one? Does that still work, or do I have to come up with another one?
Yeah, I suppose CPS2 wasn't the launch title for CPS2 Super Street Fighter 2, right?
Yeah. Actually, You know what? I know a way to get Hyper Fighting in there if we did a Street Fighter Anniversary Edition.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a late title, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that one you could pick people based on which version. So I'd still keep Super Turbo, but I would also get Anniversary Edition so I could do the others. So
wow, yeah. you're a psycho, man.
I love some Street Fighter. Yeah, and then Pro Gear for number 3.
Awesome, man. I'll get that flight ready for you.
Yeah, right. Thanks. Yeah, load me up.
Dude, thank you so much for your time, man.
Yeah, that was great hanging out with you.
No, likewise. Yeah. Where can people find you, and have you got anything you'd like to promote or shout out?
Let's see. Well, I'm you can find me on the LibRetro forums, or on the RetroArch subreddit, or on our Discord server. I also have my blog, filthypants.blogspot.com, where I post stuff. That's if I need a thing on the internet and I can't find it, and then I go find it out, that's where I put it. It's on my blog. So anything you find there, you won't find anywhere else unless somebody copied it. So there you go. Yeah, no, that's about it. You can find me there. I'm also on IRC, even though nobody uses that anymore. That's for old men yelling at clouds. But yeah, that's what I got going on. Just trying to keep my head above water.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's been a good time. Thanks for hitting me up.